Fox News Alert, we are awaiting the arrival of President Trump in Rome aboard Air Force One. He's expected minutes from now, his first visit to Europe since taking office. And the timing. Well, we all feel it. The heartbreak over another act of terror. This time in Great Britain, and this time children at the center of it. The Islamic State savages are claiming responsibility for killing at least 22 people at a concert packed with young girls and their parents. Before leaving the Middle East, our president condemned the slaughter of young innocents.
So many young, beautiful, innocent people living and enjoying their lives murdered by evil losers in life. I won't call them monsters because they would like that term. They would think that's a great name. I will call them from now on losers, because that's what they are. They're losers.
This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Sandra Smith, Meghan McCain, Fox News contributor and Republican strategist Lisa Booth, and today's #OneLuckyGuy, Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he is outnumbered.
I'm trying to laugh because this is such a happy assignment, but the news is so bad, it's so awful as you contemplate this. I was on with Martha McCallum last night as this was breaking, and as it comes in fits and starts, it kills you to have to report this and live through it. But we do.
It hurts. Yeah. About half of those 22 who perished were under the age of 16.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think these losers, as the president calls them, feel they can use children as pawns and as instruments to terrify because they are so innocent, so beautiful, and so helpless. It's obvious that they were targeted.
Let's begin. Sheer panic and terror after a man reportedly identified as Salam Abedi detonated a bomb outside the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, England. Ariana drew her usual young crowd, teenagers, tweens, many with their parents. And when that bomb went off, they ran for their lives, jumping out of their seats, lifting each other over barriers, anything and everything to get to safety. Parents desperately trying to reunite with their children. One of the dead reportedly identified as an 8-year-old girl at the concert with her mom and sister. Police at this hour say they have raided 2 residential areas in Manchester and so far arrested 1 person. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal joins us live now from Manchester. Rick?
And Harris, just to set the scene, Manchester is a city of about 500,000 people. It's roughly 210 miles north and west of London, so about the difference between Washington and New York. And Manchester Arena is not just the largest indoor concert venue in the UK, it's the largest across Europe, holding some 21,000 people. And it was a packed house here last night for that Ariana Grande concert. And then the description from witnesses was sheer chaos when they heard a loud bang and people started screaming and then rushing and stampeding towards the exits, where one of those exits is where apparently this suicide bomber detonated this improvised explosive device. According to authorities, that device packed with nuts and bolts and possibly nails, timed to inflict maximum carnage on this crowd of mostly teens and young adults. Police have identified the suspects through U.S. authorities, through British authorities, but at the news conference a short time ago, British authorities just basically spoke about how awful this whole thing was.
We have been treating this as a terrorist incident, and we believe at this stage the attack last night was conducted by one man. The priority is to establish whether he was acting alone or as part of a network.
At least 59 injured and 22 dead, including 18-year-old Georgina Bethany Callender, a student who was described as having a big smile, someone who loved pop music and Ariana Grande. And then you mentioned the 8-year-old, Safi Rose Russos, whose mom and I'm told 2 sisters wounded by shrapnel, now among the victims recovering in 8 different area hospitals. First responders obviously swarmed this scene, and so did frantic parents desperately searching for their loved ones, dozens of whom are now recovering in those hospitals.
It was just chaos, utter chaos, and frightening. It's terrifying.
I was just really nervous about what would happen, and as soon as I heard the bang, I just decided to run. I just didn't know what to do.
We just heard screaming, and everybody was running from the back towards the front.
Saw like a flash, like an explosion flash, and then at that point everyone was running back up the stairs again, panicking, screaming, shouting, crying.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth released a statement which reads in part, "The whole nation has been shocked by the death and injury in Manchester last night of so many people, adults and children who had just been enjoying a concert. I know I speak for everyone in expressing my deepest sympathy to all who have been affected by this dreadful event, and especially to the families of those who have died or were injured." The British intelligence agency MI5, basically the British equivalent to the FBI, is heavily involved in investigating this case. We believe there are FBI agents from the U.S. here on the ground in the U.K. as well, and they are executing search warrants. Harris, as you mentioned, there has been an arrest, we're told, of one other person suspected of being connected somehow to this attack, a 23-year-old who was busted here in South Manchester, very close to our location, and the searches and the investigation obviously continues.
You know, Rick, I think at this point it's one of those questions that we may not be able to answer, but I hear it from everybody. I have it coming from my own heart, and that has to do with what's going on with finding anybody who might be connected to the man who blew himself up and killed so many people. I know they've made one arrest. What more can you tell us?
Don't have a lot of information, but I can tell you that after incident, investigations have become very, very sophisticated. They're very good at that here as well as in the U.S. They have a lot of tools at their disposal to track down people who they believe are connected to this incident. And if they believe the suicide bomber, they've identified him, then they go back. They trace back from him his cell phone records, his computer records, any other possible leads are being chased down in every possible way, because they want to know everyone this person spoke with or had contact with over the last days and weeks and months, and that could lead them to other people who helped him carry out this attack.
Hey, Rick, as you were speaking, we were sort of reliving that video that we saw so many times last evening of those young girls running down the escalator, many parents standing at the bottom waiting to possibly see one of their own children come down. They didn't flee because, of course, they're waiting for their kids. That being said, one government official did note the placement of the bomb near the exit, pointing to premeditation and the sophistication of this attack. Can you tell us anything more that you know about that, and what we now know about this attack that does show that premeditation and sophistication?
Well, there's no question that it was time to inflict maximum carnage and positioned in such a way as to hit the people who were leaving the concert just as it ended. I think we can push in through this fence and this sign to show you some glass doors that lead from Victoria Station, which is one of two main transit hubs in Manchester, and it's connected to Manchester Arena. And I'm told by officers on the ground that the suspect, it's a public area, that this suspect, this bomber, managed to make his way into a public area, sort of an alleyway, hallway type of area between the train station and the concert hall, so that as people were coming out of the concert hall, and in many cases probably headed for a train, that's where he blew himself up.
All right. Rick, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Boy, this is a tough day. And, you know, Judge, we were talking before the show, the child element of this makes it tough, but all around, I mean, it is a headwind we are facing with these savages.
I hate to say this, but you have to ask this question, is this the new normal? Are we going to be confronting things like this all the time, and will we be sort of deadened to the sting of it?
We have a say in it.
Frequency with which it happens. Of course we have a say in.
Well, then the answer is no.
But it just keeps happening over and over again. I don't want to sound callous. I'm not. I'm sympathetic and I'm empathetic. But the fact that British law enforcement is able to go through cell phones and text messages now means they should have gone through cell phones and text messages earlier. They had, just like our NSA, they had all this information. They suffer, just like we do here, from information overload. It's impossible for them to examine all the data we had. San Bernardino, Orlando, and even Boston and Marathon. We had all their text messages. We didn't know about it until after those tragedies occurred.
And that's in the aftermath, looking at what they can. But leading up to this attack, they also have to look at, were there warning signs or red flags?
Well, we now know that there were some tweets that
Right.
were warning signs
That were not taken down.
And Twitter didn't take them down, and Twitter didn't send them to the FBI or to the MI5, which is another issue about why Twitter didn't find them. But there almost always are some warning signs because these
Excuse
people.
me, Judge, I have to step in because the picture has changed on the screen. We want everybody to know what this is. This is the President of the United States now landing in Rome. He'll be meeting with Pope Francis. And of course, as the White House has said, this is the only president in our history who has met in holy cities of 3 major faiths around the world. We saw him in Israel. We know that he has met with leaders of the Muslim faith, the Jewish faith, and now the Christian faith. So we just want to point out the president is on the ground in Rome. And as he comes off that plane, sometimes, President Trump can be unpredictable. We can pop up that microphone sometimes and hear some wild audio with him greeting those members on the ground. Members today, which will be more than just diplomatic dignitaries. There will be clergy on the ground. And as those moments happen, we will bring them to you live. President Trump in Rome to meet the Pope.
So this is Leonardo da Vinci International Airport, known locally as Fiumicino, the Little River, because there's a little stream that goes through. It's been called Fiumicino from the days when it was just an airstrip before World War II.
I love that texture and color from you.
You talking about my words or my tie?
If I could tie his arrival to Rome to terror, and that would be the way the president started out his first foreign trip was taking a very firm stance on terror. And then this event has happened last night at the Ariana Grande concert. What do you expect to hear from the president in the wake of this? Obviously, we've already heard from him, but does this change things for him?
I think it adds to the challenges that he confronts. I mean, the first 2/3 of this trip have won bravura raves and reviews on this side of the Atlantic. He's been extremely presidential. This is almost like the speech he gave to the Congress a few months ago. Everybody said, look, he can be presidential when he wants. He's been nearly brilliant in Riyadh and Jerusalem. He now has the additional pressure of being brilliant on the third leg, confronted by this tragedy, and about to confront a pope with whom he has had publicly chilly relations, and it's been bilateral. They each have been chilly.
But they can come together on the message right now that people were harmed. Lisa?
Well, and you had mentioned, what do we know about this terrorist? But I think it's increasingly difficult for law enforcement and the intelligence communities across the world. Secretary Kelly said not too long ago that we're facing an unprecedented increase in homegrown terrorists. He said that the FBI has opened investigations in all 50 states. There have been at least 37 ISIS-linked plots to attacks in our country since 2013. In the past year alone, there's been 36 homegrown terror cases in 18 different states. So I think as these threats increase, it's very difficult to pinpoint. And the president says that they're losers, but I would say that they're cowards. They want us to fear them, but they blow themselves up around young girls. They tie people's hands behind their backs so they're defenseless and slit their throats. They put real soldiers in cages and light them on fires. They're cowards. That's what they are. They're not just losers. They're cowards.
Well, remember, they're trying to strike terror and then fear in the minds of the West so that we will stop resisting them. Of course, for us, it stiffens our resistance.
Absolutely. Well, we have each other. There's so many more of us than there are of them. Megan, as we look at the situation and kind of where we are, and Sandra alluded to this with the president's speech, so on and so forth, this gives America a really up-close look at how he is in those moments. It's a different message that he puts out, perhaps, than previous presidents. What are your thoughts?
President Obama said the greatest existential threat to the world was climate change. We have President Trump going to Saudi Arabia and begging the Middle East to stop enabling terrorism. If that's not a juxtaposition for you, I don't know what else is. I've had my issues with President Trump. Everyone knows that. It's days like today when I am so deeply glad that he is our president and no one on the left continues to be, because I do think ISIS has raged out of control because we have led from behind for the past 8 years. I recently watched the Eagles of Death Metal documentary about the terror attack in France at that concert, and you can't help but question at this point, when I first heard the news yesterday, the sophistication level is changing, and it is morphing. It's gone from using knives and box cutters and using cars to, run over mass amounts of people and crowds, now to concert halls. Ariana Grande is, for, as we said, teenagers, hugely, hugely popular pop star and musician right now. And I think beyond that, terrorists want us to fear just simply going outside, simply enjoying the most simplistic things in life, like enjoying a concert. And you have to wonder if we need to heighten up security at some of these concert venues. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know enough at this point about what kind of security they had there, but we have two incidences, two very, Eagles of Death Metal, not on the same caliber of popularity as Ariana Grande pop star wise, but you have to start asking these kind of questions.
No, and there have been some strong discussions, and there will be going forth, about how this particular venue may not have had all of the assets that it needed in order to have this type of a concert with presence. It's a couple hours outside of or maybe even farther than that, outside of London. So maybe perhaps this was considered the softest of soft targets. But look at what's happened.
Great Britain is the most surveilled country in Europe, and Manchester is the second most surveilled city in Great Britain. Obviously, London has more cameras. It's almost inconceivable that at a public venue right outside the concert venue, picture a place the size of Madison Square Garden. It's inconceivable that there aren't cameras watching people as they go in and as they come out.
But it's not inconceivable that they would have watched the place enough to know that. And that's the sophistication that Lisa was talking about.
One of the law enforcement people we spoke to last night, when they began to examine whatever device went off, opined that the wearer didn't set it off. Somebody else did. Somebody else who knew where the wearer was and when enough young people were around him to set it off. That's the person, that's the network that British law enforcement has to find.
I just wonder, as the president lands in Rome there, we know he's meeting with the Pope tomorrow, what his message will be, if he changes his message, and if this gives him more room to toughen his stance on this war on terror.
I think it does give him more room. I think the Pope probably will agree with what he says, these people, or whatever you want to call them. He doesn't want to call them monsters.
I call them savages.
I happen to agree with him on that. They're savages, they're losers, whatever language you have to manifest utter, total indifference
but
to
Pope Francis
human life.
called him, I believe, unchristian because of the travel ban and because we're not letting in refugees. So let's not pretend that this is going to be all on the same page collectively in their ideology and vision of how we should view the world. President Trump has taken a hard line. We are not accepting refugees into this country. Obviously, Pope Francis has an entirely different view. So, yes, obviously the events of yesterday heightened this conversation even more. But I do think President Trump has more clout at this point. People are scared at this moment. I don't think we should approach this from a place of fear entirely. But when you're talking about surveillance and things like that, if you watch the Eagles of Death Metal documentary, which I really think everyone should, it brings things to a personal, a different perspective, especially when it comes to musical concerts. But the lead singer said, I don't think this would have happened had there been more people armed inside in my concert venue. And whatever you want to say, this isn't just about surveillance. This is also about keeping people safe and keeping guards armed. And now it seems that concert venues, especially large ones, are going to be targets of this type of thing. Then we need to act more realistically.
There is no disarmed country in Western Europe more than Great Britain, where the police don't carry guns.
That's the point. The point I was trying to make.
Well, but we can also talk about protecting these different places in a better way, which I agree to that point. I think there's always more that you can do, but you can also look at Nice, France, where a truck plowed in
the London Bridge. This has not been that long ago since someone drove across the bridge and killed. I mean, look.
Or what happened in Times Square the other day. Granted, it wasn't terror related, but it demonstrates the level of vulnerability for citizens in this country. So I think we can talk about, what we can do. Secretary Mattis spoke not too long ago about some of the tactical changes under this administration, whether it was just simply allowing our military leaders to do what they believe that they need to do to go after ISIS, or even just tactical changes that have been made. But I think the broader problem we're facing here is this is an ideology. So we can increase our attacks and efforts against ISIS, but even if we kill every single member, that ideology lasts, and there's going to be another group like them. So we need to do
my dad, the fighter pilot, would argue that it's a good start if you can kill a lot of them.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
It's eternal vigilance, no matter how many or how few
Lieutenant
of them
General
remain.
McInerney was on our air just a couple of hours ago, and I was in my office and I'm watching, and he said something that hit me between the eyes, and it has to do with that ideology and what we need to do moving forward. And, his idea was this. I mean, it's not enough now to say that we're just going to fight. We've got to understand who we're fighting so we can hit them in ways that, they're suffering right now. We're killing a lot of them. And so they're able to hit us in ways that join us at the heart. I mean, this was hurtful.
All right, we just got word that the police in the UK are holding a press briefing. Let's get right to that.
Response across Greater Manchester has been significant today as we help people to continue to go about their daily business and lead their lives here in Greater Manchester. Part of this response has seen us arrest a 23-year-old man in connection with the attack, and we've also carried out 2 warrants, one in Whalley Range and one in Fallowfield. The one in Fallowfield did see us undertake a controlled explosion to gain entry, and again I just wish to reassure those communities that was something that we were doing to gain safe access. It is nothing to be concerned about. We understand that feelings are very raw right now and that people are bound to be looking for answers. However, more than ever, it is vital that our diverse communities that make Greater Manchester such a strong place actually stand together and support each other, as we will be doing in the vigil at 6 p.m. this evening. We will therefore not tolerate hate towards any parts of our community, and should communities be suffering from hate incidents or crime, then I would please urge them to report it to us. This afternoon, as you saw, we were visited by the Home Secretary Theresa May and the Home Secretary Amber Rudd, both of whom given a briefing about our ongoing operations and the investigation over today and the next few days. I can confirm that the man suspected of carrying out last night's atrocity is 22-year-old Salman Abedi. However, he has not yet been formally named by the coroner, and I wouldn't wish to therefore comment any further about him at this stage. Our priority, along with the police counter-terrorist network and our security partners, is to continue to establish whether he was acting alone or working as part of a wider network. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, that was Manchester Police wrapping up a press briefing there in Manchester, England, following last night's attack at that concert. We are told that the male, 22 years old, Salman Adidi, has been identified. They're still waiting on the coroner's office to identify him. He has been, one has been arrested, a 23-year-old male, and there are 2 warrants out. We are just learning that. They're still looking for answers. A lot still unknown about that attack taking place at that concert venue in Manchester last evening. We'll be right back with more. Back to the couch. Okay, I'm gonna bring this out to the couch, actually, Judge, because what we just learned there was a lot more information on the people involved. Not that much more information, but we did learn more. You just heard the police chief talking about the diverse communities and how, while that's what makes their communities great, these communities need to stand together. What was he trying to say there?
He's trying to say that the job of the police and the obligation of the police is to protect everybody, not just people who look British, but even people who don't look British, even people who are immigrants. Now, the message below that radar screen is, help us and we'll help you.
Exactly.
If you know of people in your communities that knew this guy, we want to talk to them.
Very important.
And you should come to us. We are here for all of you. We're going to keep you safe as well as keep us safe.
So this is a lesson that we're trying to learn up in the Minneapolis area that I visited last summer.
Right. I remember you telling us about that.
You know, upwards of 10 people who wanted to join ISIS. Remember all those trials of those young men and convictions and confessions in some cases. But, you know, as you look at this, Molenbeek in Belgium has struggled mightily with the idea of how do you roll out the red carpet and get information from people where those living among them are willing to kill you based on an ideology. And they haven't figured it out yet. At least it doesn't seem so.
For some reason, the culture and the role of the government in the lives of the people is far more advanced in Great Britain toward knowing what's going on and knowing who lives in the community and having an understanding of the groups that live there than is the case in Belgium.
I pointed out how little we still know about this, and also the police chief also just confirming that they still don't know whether or not this man acted alone or within a network that we were just told moments ago as well.
So They pick up all the pieces from the scene, including cell phone, and once they have that, it's a treasure trove to everything else. Everybody's texted with, everybody's emailed to, everybody's communicated with, and they have to touch base with every single one of those human beings.
Is it easier over there with the laws than it is here? Because remember in San Bernardino, there was the whole idea, so do we call the phone company and ask them how to crack the code and the blah, blah, blah? And then it turns out at one point they had already had the phone's code.
It is a little bit easier over there. They have a statute which permits them to arrest people without suspicion and hold them and interrogate them for 48 hours, which obviously we couldn't do here under the Constitution. The police have a little bit more leeway, but they still have to get a search warrant based on some belief in the criminality of the person who's the subject of the search.
And they're clearly making progress on that. They said they've arrested a 23-year-old man in connection with this attack, and they have issued 2 warrants. Megan?
Listen, I think everybody's sick of this. I mean, I don't know why. I'm not eloquent enough of a poet to put this in a better way. I was so angry yesterday. I think the fact that it is sort of becoming normalized. I'm not going to say the new normal, but more normalized, and that this happens more and more frequently. We collectively, globally have to come together and realize it is our way of life or it is theirs. And I think there's been a lot of people that sort of want to be a little too politically correct, don't want to say things like radical Islamic extremism. And on this level, in this sphere, I really think President Trump has the right direction on this. And globally, we all have to come together and fight this cancer. The youngest victim yesterday was 8 years old, an 8-year-old little girl. Think about, as Lisa said, what kind of coward and monster it takes to target an 8-year-old child at a pop concert.
Well, and Megan mentions difficult conversations, and Harris, you had mentioned the Molenbeek area. And so there are some of these difficult conversations that we have to happen. Because you look at places like Molenbeek where they have had a lack of integration, a lack of assimilation, and that's where one of the Paris killers was actually hiding for a long duration of time. So these are difficult but important conversations that we need to be having in this country and elsewhere in the world.
All right. So this is a situation that is kind of interesting. So this is actually Air Force One that's landing right now in Rome.
I thought
moments ago, I told you that
he landed already.
Air Force One had already landed, and we did see that together, and that was not our eyes playing a trick on us. They're identical planes, apparently, or pretty close darn to it. And
so it worked.
Right. But
do we know which one he's in?
Yeah, we do. He's actually on this plane.
We know what we're told.
And I know, I always wondered what that term, we know what we don't know. Now we know what we didn't know.
The other 747, to be clear, is used as a support plane.
Right.
This is the one carrying the president.
Which one is John Roberts and the rest of our colleagues luxuriating on?
They would be on this plane. They're traveling right with the president, which I'm also sort of surmising here, and probably more than a guess, is how we figured out that the plane had not quite landed yet.
Okay.
And remember, just moments ago, I don't know if you were watching closely here on Outnumbered, but they were taking a close-up of the flag and then the tail and then and I thought, we're looking for something. And now we know we found the right plane. As Sandra said, the first one landed, the second one is here. This is the president. And I'm going to say it again. This is a president who, on occasion, will say something that we don't even anticipate with that microphone on. So we'll make sure that we are paying close attention. He may have something to say to the clergy members, the diplomats, the dignitaries on the ground, and we'll bring all that to you live.
But what's most important is he's meeting with Pope Francis, who he feuded with at length during the election. And as I remember coming in one day and saying, I never thought I would see the day when a presidential candidate was on Twitter feuding with our Pope.
Yeah.
So, and they have some similarities in the sense that they're both sort of unorthodox leaders. I don't know how to put it in any more tame way for television, but they view the world. They view the world from such drastically different lenses. Pope Francis at one time took a vow of poverty. He sees the world from a much more liberal standpoint. Thinks climate change is a huge deal. Thinks anyone that doesn't accept refugees into the country is unchristian. Obviously, President Trump feuded with him. It will be interesting to see if they find any common ground. And Harris, when you're talking about him speaking off the cuff, will he be making jokes about their feud at any point?
We do know somebody.
I do want to point out real quickly, he's actually right on time. We were expecting him to set down Eastern time at 12:30 p.m. There in Rome, and it is now 12:29 and some change. So he's right on time, Judge.
We do know somebody intimately involved with all this because he used to work here. Greg Burke, our former colleague, is the chief spokesperson for the Pope. So I am certain, knowing Greg as we all do, he's been on the phone with whoever, if Sean Spicer is still on the plane. Hey, we got to address this thing that just happened in Manchester. How is your guy going to address it? Here's how our guy is going to address it.
Interesting.
No surprises.
Kind of piggybacking, I went back through my notes because I was looking for what that language was on the trail. And I didn't remember this, but one of our producers on the team pointed this out, that on the trail, then candidate Donald Trump said that if ISIS attacked the Vatican, the Pope would wish Donald Trump was president. So that gives you a little bit of color and texture going into this meeting.
He brought up a lot about the walls, too, because Pope Francis was highly critical of President Trump's now notorious border wall. And President Trump pointed out, you have a wall that protects Vatican cities. So again, maybe the wall will come up today. Go ahead, please.
Well, I think one thing that this trip highlights as well is, if you guys remember during the campaign, President Trump was someone that Hillary Clinton told us that couldn't be trusted with the nuclear codes. But so far, and he's still in the infancy of his administration, but so far we've seen a commander-in-chief that has shown resolve against our enemies, whether it's Syria, whether it's North Korea, and even on this trip, sending a message by going to Saudi Arabia first. And if you guys all remember, you all know this, that the last time President Obama was there, the king didn't even meet him at the airport, yet we've seen American flags lined the streets when he arrived. So sending that message to our Arab or Gulf state allies that we are with you. And then not only that, but going from Saudi Arabia to Israel, two countries that have no diplomatic relations as well, and sending that strong message to our ally Israel that we're with you as well. So I think this is a president that deserves some, respect and kudos for his handling of foreign relations thus far.
What's really interesting is we started this show 31 minutes ago, and the president appears to have been tweeting while he was on the plane, thanking the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for a wonderful and unforgettable visit. First, he said Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Middle East were great, trying hard for peace, doing well, heading to Vatican and Pope, then G7 and NATO. He finished with his last tweet 31 minutes ago, right at the top of the hour, saying all civilized nations must join together to protect human life and the sacred right of our citizens to live in safety and in peace.
All right, President Trump has now arrived in Rome, and he continues his first overseas trip as president. Meanwhile, we are learning more about last night's deadly terror attack at the Ariana Grande concert in the UK. It left 22 people dead, dozens hurt, many of them children. ISIS is claiming responsibility for the carnage. So far, though, intelligence sources have not corroborated that. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live with us now with the latest details on that. And Catherine, based on the police news conference that they were having trouble identifying the bomber who they just named, what's going on with that?
Well, this is another data point or piece of evidence, Harris, that tells us that the impact of this explosion was of a significant magnitude, and this goes to the issue of premeditation. That's what I'm hearing consistently from my counterterrorism contacts. That kind of premeditation meant that the bomb was planted in an area of the arena that was an enclosed space. That matters because when the device goes off, it has a concussive effect. That's a fancy way of saying that it amplifies the impact of the explosives as well as the shrapnel to create maximum fatalities and casualties. And in this particular case, they've got a name. I believe it's based on the closed-circuit camera video identifying the individual, but they're waiting for the coroner because the bomber would have been, what's the term I want to use, almost vaporized by the attack, so they have to rely on DNA here.
Okay, so you talk about that sophistication and the placement of the bomb now and how much that concussion was enhanced by its placement. That is frightening. Catherine, there is an inconsistency in the statement that ISIS put out. Many of them, actually. What does that tell us?
Well, there are always different translations of these ISIS statements. I have one here that was provided by a counterterrorism contact, and they pointed out the fact that there is an inconsistency, and that may be important to understanding what the true nature of the plot was. In this statement, it talks about a soldier of the caliphate planting devices, so planting multiple explosives. That suggests that the person's intention was to leave the scene, but that, in fact, is not what happened. So they have not jumped to the conclusion, or they've not confirmed that they believe it was a suicide attack at this point. They believe the suspect with the device was killed, but they're not clear that that was the true intention of the attack, given what ISIS is saying online. Maybe an example of ISIS trying to take responsibility for something that they sort of managed from a distance, but that will all be told in the next hours and days, Harris.
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much.
You're
Popping
welcome.
up with the very latest on this breaking news. Thank you. And now to the left of your screen, the live picture. And it looks like we're close. They put down the stairs. That is, in fact, Air Force One, not the support plane that set down 15 minutes ago, people. And so President Trump is going to come down the stairs there and meet with the people on the tarmac. Judge Knapp, you were very active in the Newark Archdiocese. You must have thoughts about how a meeting can happen between this president and the Pope when they haven't really exchanged niceties.
You know, I was involved in the planning from the American end of John Paul II's first visit to the United States, in which he landed in Newark and was greeted by the Archbishop of Newark. This is different because this is the President of the United States going to Italy. My guess is he's going to be met by Italian officials here, not Vatican officials. He doesn't get to the Vatican. Spoke, of religious tones, but he spoke as a secular leader. Guys, the president is not surprising us. He's in the limo, and he's on his way to wherever he's going to go and have a nice Italian dinner.
All right. He gave a wave on the tarmac there to the people who had gathered before he got into the vehicle there, the presidential vehicle there on grounds of Rome. And, you know, I was just looking through some of the notes. I know that they had strengthened the papal security last night in anticipation of what's coming tomorrow with the president's visit. Not a surprise. That might be not even an abundance of caution based on what's happened around the world in the UK, but just basically how they do things. But you know from these types of visits, the kind of energy that is expended, if you will, to make sure that every detail and every protocol is matched and goes smoothly. But politically, how does it play if the Pope and President Trump are nice? I mean, does that work?
I think it does work
Is it necessary?
if they're nice, as long as it is a sincere niceness, as long as they want to dwell on the things about which they agree. I have a friend who's one of the senior art historians in the Vatican, and I just emailed her the other day. She goes, I can't even answer your emails. I can't answer your emails until after the president leaves. You have no idea the pressure we're under because we know what he's like. He may decide he wants to take a tour of the Vatican art galleries, and I'm the one that has to give the tour. She said, I'm not even sleeping at night these days.
It will also be interested to know if Callista Gingrich makes an appearance and she's going to, or she's appointed to be the new ambassador of Vatican City. If she's traveling with them, I don't know this. And if she is introduced at this time as well.
I did not, since she hasn't been confirmed as Senate yet, and I did not see her there in the entourage that got off of Air Force One. She we would recognize.
Judge, what's your hope for this meeting between the president and the Pope? What do you want the takeaway to be, or what do you hope the takeaway is?
That people will forget the animosity that they demonstrated toward each other during the campaign. Whoever you think was the cause of it, I think they are both meeting with an effort to turn a page. And knowing at least the people around the Pope, I think you're going to find that that is a genuine view on that side as well.
I want to go back to something that you said previously about the liberal nature that you have observed with this current Pope Francis, and how, you didn't use the word ostracized, but maybe how at odds, if you will, at times, the polarized politics have been with the Catholic faithful, and how that plays. How does President Trump fall on that, do you
Well, I hope that does not come up with the president.
Well, he may not bring it up.
Well, I can't imagine that they'll bring this issue up because it has to do with divorce. The president is twice divorced. It had to do with the Catholic teaching on divorce and whether divorced couples can receive the Blessed Sacrament at Mass, an absolute prohibition for hundreds of years that the present Pope seems to want to reevaluate in a way that is infuriating traditionalists like me. This is not something they're going to talk about. I can't imagine they're going to discuss theology. They're going to find common interests on common problems that are worldwide.
But their dedication to just being pro-life would be a nice place to start.
That's a great starting point on which they are on the same side.
All right.
So smart.
Of course.
Thanks, Megan. We knew that. I do what I can. Of course. Thank you.
All right. So the president has pulled out of that picture, and we will pull away now from Rome and return to the other big story of the day. We're learning more details about the horrific terror attack in Manchester, England. The Senate Armed Services Committee right now is wrapping up a hearing on worldwide threats. One topic there, the risk of potential terror attacks on the United States. Here's the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, from earlier.
This threat is real. It is not going away and needs significant attention. Do everything we can to protect our people from these kinds of attacks. We assess that ISIS maintains the intent and capability to direct, enable, assist, and inspire transnational attacks. This threat will persist, with many attacks happening little or no warning.
All right, so as we return to terror, your thoughts?
Very sobering. I don't think there's anything new there, but we need to hear that. We need to be mindful of the fact that the tragedy we all witnessed last night is not necessarily, by any means, confined to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and that's what Director Coates is reminding us of.
I don't think anybody even assumes that right now. I mean, you talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors, everybody's terrified in the wake of this attack and worry that it could be here next.
Yeah. Well, listen, we all thought when that awful thing happened just a block from here, the crazy person on some sort of a drug mowing people down. What was our initial thought?
Well, Lisa hit the nail on the head, though. It didn't have to be terror for it to have the effect of showing our enemies our vulnerabilities.
Yes.
You use those words.
Well,
yes.
And I think, too, I mean, the threat is here, right? As I had mentioned earlier in the show, just the statements from the Homeland Security Secretary, the fact, as I mentioned before, open investigations in all 50 states. There has been at least 37 ISIS-linked plots to attack our country since 2013. There have been at least 36 homegrown terror cases in 18 different states. So the threat is here. And so obviously it's important that this administration remains vigilant against these threats that we face.
My biggest frustration, I mean, I have many frustrations right now, but one of the biggest, and I know you and I don't see this exactly through the same lens, Judge, but what role Silicon Valley can continue to play in helping us fight terror? Sandra, you said that there were tweets that this attacker had put out that could have been warning signs.
That is true.
You know, we have, again, I know you and I, Judge, see this through different ways, but I do think there has to be some kind of onus on the billionaires who have made their money and their profit and their success in the United States of America, helping to protect the freedoms that we all love so much. And again, when things like this happen, I want to know from the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, I believe his name is, what would you have done differently? Because we have got to start learning the lessons, especially when there's a footprint on social media.
It is not just an onus on Silicon Valley. The federal government, through the NSA, has every one of those tweets. It's too much for them to analyze. They should be able to analyze it. It is unbelievable for us to know now that there was a warning about this thing a few hours before it happened, and nobody caught it. Yeah, nobody in law enforcement caught it.
Well, and so is this politically an opening for Republicans? And I know that typically we don't say negative things when the president is off the soil about him, but that doesn't preclude anybody from being negative about the lawmakers at home, right?
Right.
So is this an opportunity for Republicans to stand up and say, you know what? Who's with them on the issue of a tougher stance on terror? Who's with them on the issue of a one-on-one with Silicon Valley that's not like a alcoholless beer summit, but where they really sit down and they get to the nitty-gritty of where liberty meets protection.
And it's not just having 4 random conservatives come meet for an hour. Because remember, they had some conservatives come because they were trying to, you know, suppress conservative news outlets on Facebook. It goes so far beyond that. And I do find in my conversations with people, you know, who defend Silicon Valley, there is a point, we are going to come to a point when terrorists are utilizing social media in the way that they are. Again, warnings on Twitter, and it hasn't seen, at what point are we going to get together with Silicon Valley and with all governments to try and make... I'm not saying all progress, just any kind of progress.
Maybe to use this...
The tiniest aspect of progress.
They didn't need to black site this. It was on Twitter. We move on. Meanwhile, the attack in Manchester is now renewing the debate over the president's travel ban. We've been talking about it a little bit here. We're going to go deeper. But could the ban prevent what we just saw in Great Britain? And will that affect the court's decision? We'll debate it. Stay close.
The horrific attack at the concert in Manchester putting spotlight back on President Trump's travel ban, which has been blocked in the courts. Jay Sekulow, chief counsel for a conservative legal group, saying that after Manchester, there is no reason not to support the president's executive order. He says, quote, does anybody want to argue that we shouldn't have an executive order restricting who's coming into the country so that we know who these people are? Does anyone want to argue that case? I'd like to take on that argument. 2 federal appeal courts have now heard arguments over President Trump's revised travel ban after federal courts in Hawaii and Maryland blocked the ban from taking effect. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Judge. You know, I wasn't the biggest fan of the travel ban for the rollout reasons and because we stopped Iraqi translators from coming into the country. But the problem isn't just not letting people into the country. It's these lone wolves who are being radicalized here as well, and in Europe.
Well, to me, the problem is the judiciary stepping on the toes of the executive branch in an area where the Constitution gives the authority expressly to the president, and the Congress has said expressly, you may do this, you may impose travel bans based on geography for finite periods of time. The courts have said this is not based on geography, it's based on religion. And they have used to support that conclusion the more incendiary language that the president and some of his campaign followers used during the campaign. Can they do that? Yes, they can do that. It's a disfavored way to examine a statute, to look at it by what the person said about it before they were in office. But it means that if Barack Obama had signed this same order, the courts would find it constitutional.
But the question I think that's being raised is do you think there's more of will be more enthusiasm, more support for this travel ban?
I think there'll be more political support for it. I don't think that this will change the minds of the appellate judges in whose hands the travel ban now rests, and I think it will ultimately go to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Well, and, Megan, you had mentioned, obviously, the first rollout was a disaster, but a lot of those concerns were addressed and rectified in the second rollout, and it was done in a much more organized manner. But I think that this has really been sensationalized because we were literally, as the judge pointed out, we're literally talking about a very brief span of time where there is a pause on countries that were identified from President Obama and Congress as places that needed travel restrictions in the first place. And in regard to the Muslim question, the top three, largest Muslim population countries aren't included in this ban. So right. I really think that this has been way over sensationalized. And, look, we can take every help we can get in trying to solve this fight against terror.
We're talking about how it changes, may or may not change the conversation here, Judge. How does it change the conversation there, dealing with another terrorist attack and their open borders?
When you say there, you mean where? In Great Britain?
In Europe, all over.
Oh, I think this will have a profound effect in Europe, particularly in Great Britain, where they're in the midst of an election for the new prime minister in control of parliament, and Theresa May is shockingly close to her adversary. She was leading him by 30 or 40 points a few weeks ago. Which way this goes?
Angela Merkel is coming up too,
yes.
And obviously Germany's chancellor, who has basically put her entire legacy, or most of it, on letting in 1 million refugees, I believe, from Syria.
One word, Brexit. So much of the backing of that legislation, or that movement, if you will, had to do with the immigration that has happened in the UK.
Fully agreed.
All right, we're going to be right back.
Many thanks to Andrew Napolitano, Judge Andrew Napolitano. That is with all.
No matter what we're talking about, it's a gift to be able to work with you.
We love having you.
In and out of Italian. Well, the president landed in Rome. It was impressive. Ci vediamo.
Got to leave it there. Thank you. And Lisa, great to have you as well. We're going to be back on TV tomorrow at noon Eastern. Thank you for joining us. Happening Now starts.